The screams echo through the underground corpse pile, a cacophony of anguish that would drive lesser hunters mad. But it's not the screams that chill your blood as you descend into this nightmare realm. It's the sound that comes after them, a rhythmic pounding, like hoofbeats from something that should never have hooves, accompanied by a shriek that no human throat could produce. Down here, in the festering darkness of the hunter's nightmare, something massive stirs. Something that was once a man. Something that was once a hero. Welcome, lore seekers, to another deep dive with Keen 7 Lore, where we unravel the most haunting mysteries of gaming's darkest universes. Today, we're descending into one of Bloodborne's most tragic tales, the heartbreaking fall of Ludwig, the Holy Blade. Once Yharnam's most radiant hero, Ludwig's transformation into the Accursed represents perhaps the most devastating corruption arc in all of From Software's catalogue. His story isn't just about a hunter who became a beast. It's about how the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows, how noble intentions pave the road to damnation, and how even the purest dedication to protecting humanity can become the very thing that destroys it. In the blood-soaked streets of Yharnam, where the line between man and monster blurs with every passing night, Ludwig stood as a beacon of hope. He revolutionized the art of beast hunting, transformed the healing church's military arm into a force of legendary prowess, and inspired countless citizens to take up arms against the scourge. Yet here, in this cursed realm where failed hunters relive their sins for eternity, we find him reduced to something unspeakable, a creature so twisted that even other beasts flee from his presence. The journey from Ludwig the Holy Blade to Ludwig the Accursed spans decades of Yharnam's history, touching every aspect of the city's descent into madness. To understand his fall, we must first understand his rise, and to understand his rise, we must venture back to a time when the healing church was young, when the hunt was still in its infancy, and when one man's discovery of an impossible sword would change everything. Before Ludwig became the healing church's first official hunter, before he founded the church workshop that would produce generations of legendary warriors, Yharnam's defense against the beast plague rested in different hands. The original hunters, trained by Gehrman in the shadow of the abandoned workshop, operated in secrecy. They were assassins more than soldiers, striking from darkness with weapons designed for stealth and precision. The saw cleaver, the hunter axe, the threaded cane. These tools reflected a philosophy of hunting that emphasized quick, brutal efficiency over honor or glory. If you're enjoying this exploration into one of Bloodborne's most complex characters so far, I'd genuinely appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. It makes a real difference in helping this video reach fellow lore enthusiasts through YouTube's algorithm. Your support means everything and helps keep these in-depth investigations coming. The exact circumstances of Ludwig's early life remain shrouded in the same mystery that clouds much of Yharnam's history. Evidence suggests he may have been among the Byrgenwerth scholars who first discovered the old blood in the tombs beneath the city, though other sources indicate he might have been one of Gehrman's original hunters who chose a different path. What we know with certainty from confirmed canon is that Ludwig emerged as a transformative figure during the healing church's early consolidation of power, at a time when the institution needed not just hunters, but heroes. The church faced a crisis of perception. While their blood ministration had brought miraculous healing to Yharnam's citizens, the beast scourge that followed in its wake threatened to destroy everything they had built. The secret hunts conducted by Gehrman's hunters weren't enough anymore. The beasts were growing larger, more numerous, and the whispered rumors about clerics transforming into the most terrible creatures of all threatened to undermine the church's authority. They needed a new approach, a public face for the hunt that could inspire rather than terrify. Ludwig provided exactly what they needed. Unlike Gehrman's hunters who operated from the shadows, Ludwig brought the hunt into the light. He didn't just kill beasts. He turned beast hunting into something noble, something worthy of admiration rather than fear. The Radiant Sword. Hunter Badge, which would become the symbol of church hunters for generations, originated with Ludwig's philosophy. Where the old hunters saw themselves as necessary evils, Ludwig transformed his hunters into knights, holy warriors blessed by the church to protect the innocent. This transformation wasn't merely cosmetic. Ludwig understood that fighting larger, more dangerous beasts required new tactics and new weapons. The trick weapons of the old workshop, while effective against human-sized enemies and early beast transformations, struggled against the massive cleric beasts that were becoming increasingly common. Ludwig's response was to establish the Church Workshop, a parallel institution to Gehrman's original that would focus on creating weapons specifically designed for these new threats. If you're finding value in uncovering these hidden connections and understanding Ludwig's revolutionary impact on Yharnam's history, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore enthusiasts. Your support truly makes these deep investigations possible, allowing us to explore every dark corner of gaming's most intricate narratives. The weapons that emerged from Ludwig's workshop reflected his philosophy perfectly. Where Gehrman's tools were subtle and versatile, Ludwig's were mighty and imposing. The Kirkhammer, combining a sword with a massive stone block, embodied the church's dual nature, elegance and brutality united in purpose. The Ludwig's Holy Blade, which would become synonymous with church hunters, represented the pinnacle of this design philosophy. In its standard form, it was a silver sword of remarkable craftsmanship, but when combined with its reinforced sheath, it transformed into a great sword capable of cleaving through the thickest beast hide. But Ludwig's true revolution came from his recruitment practices. Rather than selecting hunters from shadows and margins of society, as Gehrman had done, Ludwig openly recruited from Yharnam's citizenry. He transformed the hunt from a secret shame into a public crusade. Young men and women who might have once aspired to join the church as clerics now saw another path, one that promised glory, purpose, and the chance to be heroes. The church hunters became Yharnam's most celebrated warriors, their exploits sung in taverns and their badges worn with pride. This public transformation of the hunt had profound implications for Yharnam's society. The beast scourge was no longer a whispered terror, but an acknowledged enemy that the city united against. Ludwig's hunters didn't operate in secret. They marched through the streets in their distinctive garb, their weapons gleaming with holy purpose. Citizens who once cowered behind locked doors on the night of the hunt now gathered to watch their heroes depart for battle. Some even joined the hunt themselves, inspired by Ludwig's example to take up arms against the darkness. Yet beneath this glorious veneer, something darker was taking root. The very mechanics that made Ludwig's hunters so effective in battle contained the seeds of their corruption. The rally system, that distinctive combat style that allowed hunters to regain health by immediately counterattacking after taking damage, wasn't just a tactical innovation. It was a manifestation of the blood's influence on their bodies and minds. Each successful rally, each restoration of vitality through aggression, deepened the hunter's connection to the blood that flowed through their veins. They weren't just using the old blood, they were becoming one with it. Ludwig himself seemed immune to these concerns, at least initially. His nobility of purpose, his genuine desire to protect Yharnam's citizens, appeared to shield him from the blood's corrupting influence. But there was another factor that set Ludwig apart from his fellow hunters, a secret that he carried into the deepest chambers beneath Yharnam. For Ludwig was not merely a hunter or even a church warrior. He was also a tomb prospector, one of those brave or foolish souls who descended into the Chalice dungeons in search of ancient secrets. The Chalice dungeons represented humanity's attempt to understand and exploit the wisdom of the Great Ones. These impossible labyrinths, created through rituals that defied conventional understanding of space and time, contained treasures and horrors in equal measure. The Healing Church sponsored numerous expeditions into these depths, seeking more of the old blood that had made their miracles possible. But they found much more than blood in those twisted corridors. Ludwig's expeditions into the Chalice dungeons were legendary even among other tomb prospectors. He descended deeper than most dared, pushing through layers of reality that grew increasingly unstable the further one travelled from the waking world. The fifth layer, the deepest depth that human minds could comprehend without complete dissolution, was where Ludwig made his greatest discovery. In the Chalice, that particular labyrinth touched by the cosmos itself, he found something that would define not just his fate, but the fate of all Yharnam. The holy Moonlight sword appeared to Ludwig like a revelation. According to confirmed canon from item descriptions, this was no ordinary weapon, not even by the standards of the impossibilities that filled the Chalice dungeons. The blade channeled the abyssal cosmos itself, its edge dancing with blue moonlight that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. When Ludwig first grasped its handle, he later claimed, he heard a voice, not in his ears but in his very soul. The sword spoke to him, guided him, showed him possibilities that his human mind had never before conceived. This discovery transformed Ludwig in ways that went far beyond acquiring a new weapon. The holy Moonlight sword became his mentor, his counselor, his constant companion. While other hunters relied on blood ministration and increasingly powerful trick weapons, Ludwig had something else entirely, a direct connection to forces that existed beyond human understanding. The sword's guidance allowed him to navigate the Chalice dungeons with unprecedented success, recovering artifacts and blood vials that significantly enhanced the Church's power. But the sword's influence extended beyond exploration. In battle, Ludwig wielding the holy Moonlight sword was something transcendent. Witnesses described seeing him wreathed in moonlight, his blade leaving trails of cosmic energy that lingered in the air like wounds in reality itself. Beasts that would require entire hunting parties to bring down fell before Ludwig alone. The combination of his natural skill, the Church's blood ministration, and the sword's otherworldly power made him effectively invincible. Yet power, especially power drawn from inhuman sources, always demands a price. The holy Moonlight sword's guidance came with subtle influences that even Ludwig, for all his nobility and strength of will, couldn't entirely resist. The sword showed him visions of hunts beyond the physical realm, battles against entities that existed in spaces between spaces. It whispered of a greater purpose, a cosmic conflict in which the beast scourge was merely one small battlefield. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Ludwig's war against the beasts became something else, a crusade with implications he couldn't fully comprehend. Those closest to Ludwig began noticing changes in his behavior. He would stand for hours staring at the moon, conducting whispered conversations with his sword that observers found deeply unsettling. His tactics in battle grew increasingly brutal, moving beyond efficient beast-slaying into something that resembled revelry. The rallying technique that all church hunters employed became an obsession for Ludwig. He would deliberately take damage just for the ecstatic rush of recovering through violence, pushing the mechanism to extremes that worried even his most devoted followers. The term beast-possessed degenerate first appeared in church documents around this time, though it was quickly suppressed. Critics within the church hierarchy, particularly those who remembered the more measured approaches of earlier years, grew concerned about the direction Ludwig was taking their military arm. His hunters were becoming more effective, certainly, but they were also becoming something else. The line between hunter and beast, always perilously thin in Yharnam, was beginning to blur in ways that couldn't be ignored. The church's response to these concerns was typical of their approach to uncomfortable truths. They buried them beneath layers of propaganda and ceremonial glorification. Ludwig wasn't showing signs of blood addiction. He was demonstrating holy fervor. His hunters weren't becoming unstable. They were achieving new levels of dedication to their sacred duty. The increasing number of hunters who had to be quietly eliminated after showing signs of beasthood was simply the price of protecting Yharnam from greater threats. But Ludwig himself was beginning to understand what was happening to him. The holy Moonlight sword's guidance had shown him truths about the nature of the beast scourge that the church would never publicly acknowledge. The transformation wasn't a curse or a plague in the traditional sense. It was evolution, or rather, devolution. Humans who consumed the old blood were being pulled backward and forward simultaneously, their bodies trying to achieve a form that could contain the cosmic knowledge flooding their systems. The beast form wasn't a corruption, but an adaptation, a desperate attempt by human physiology to survive exposure to truths that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. This knowledge should have been liberating, should have provided Ludwig with the understanding necessary to resist his own transformation. Instead, it accelerated it. Knowing that beasthood was an inevitable consequence of blood use didn't stop Ludwig from consuming more blood. It justified it. If transformation was inevitable, then the only variable was how much power one could accumulate before the change occurred. Ludwig began experimenting with different blood cocktails, mixing the standard ministration with exotic varieties recovered from the deepest Chalice dungeons. The physical changes started subtly. Ludwig's already impressive height increased by several inches over the course of a few months. His movements, once graceful and measured, took on an unsettling fluidity that reminded observers of a predator constantly ready to strike. His eyes, which had always held an intensity that could inspire or terrify, began reflecting light in ways that human eyes shouldn't. But most disturbing were the sounds he made during battle. Not quite human anymore, not yet beast, but something caught terrifyingly between the two. The massacre at the fishing hamlet, while not directly involving Ludwig according to most sources, marked a turning point in the cosmic forces affecting Yharnam. The curse that the Orphan of Kos placed upon the hunters created the hunter's nightmare, a parallel dimension where the sins of the blood-drunk would be preserved and punished for eternity. Ludwig, though not present at the hamlet, was already marked by his connections to the cosmos through the holy Moonlight sword. The curse recognized him as one of its own, a hunter whose thirst for blood had crossed the boundary between necessity and addiction. As Ludwig's transformation accelerated, those around him faced an impossible dilemma. He was still their greatest warrior, still capable of achievements no other hunter could match. But he was also becoming something monstrous, something that represented everything they claimed to fight against. The church's solution was pragmatic in its cruelty. They would use Ludwig until he could no longer be controlled, then deal with him as they dealt with all their failures. The final hunt that Ludwig participated in as something resembling a human was said to be glorious and terrible in equal measure. Leading a contingent of his most devoted church hunters, he descended into a section of the Chalice dungeons that had been deemed too dangerous for exploration. What they found there remains largely unknown, as few survive to tell the tale. What is confirmed through multiple sources is that Ludwig emerged from those depths changed in ways that couldn't be hidden or explained away. The transformation itself, when it finally occurred, was unlike any beast transformation previously recorded. Where most humans who succumbed to the scourge became wolf-like or resembled other predatory mammals, Ludwig became something unique and horrifying. His body elongated and twisted, taking on equine characteristics that shouldn't have been possible given the nature of the blood. His face split and reformed, creating a second mouth that shrieked in harmonies that hurt to hear. Most disturbingly, his body seemed to partially fuse with another entity, whether this was his horse, as some sources suggest, or something else entirely remains a subject of debate among law scholars. The Church's response to Ludwig's transformation was swift and merciless. He was branded Ludwig the Accursed and banished to the Hunter's nightmare, that cosmic prison created by the orphan's curse. But even in his beast form, Ludwig retained enough of his former self to be truly tragic. Unlike other transformed hunters who lost all sense of their former identity, Ludwig remembered. In the brief moments when the blood rage subsided, he would cry out for his sword, for his hunters, for the people he had sworn to protect. The hunter's nightmare became Ludwig's eternal battlefield. Here, in this twisted reflection of Yharnam, he led an endless hunt that was both punishment and sick parody of his former glory. The river of blood that flows through the nightmare realm is said to be created by Ludwig's endless slaughter, each fallen hunter adding to the crimson tide. Yet even in this state, even reduced to a monster that other monsters fear, Ludwig never stopped searching for his guiding moonlight. The piles of corpses that surround Ludwig in his boss arena tell a story of countless attempts by other hunters to end his misery. Church hunters, old hunters, blood-drunk hunters, all have tried and failed to put down the creature that was once their greatest hero. But Ludwig endures, trapped between beast and man, between sanity and madness, between the noble hero he was and the monster he has become. His shrieks echo through the nightmare, sometimes sounding like battle cries, sometimes like pleas for death, always tinged with a sadness that transcends his monstrous form. When a hunter finally proves strong enough to challenge Ludwig effectively, something remarkable happens. As the battle reaches its climax and Ludwig's beast form is beaten to the point of collapse, the holy Moonlight sword reveals itself. The blade, which had been absent throughout Ludwig's time as a beast, suddenly appears, its cosmic light cutting through the nightmare's gloom. In that moment, Ludwig experiences a clarity he hasn't felt in decades, possibly centuries, given the nightmare's distorted relationship with time. The change that occurs when Ludwig grasps his beloved sword again is perhaps even more disturbing than his initial fall to beasthood. His monstrous form doesn't revert. That pathway is forever closed to him, but his mind returns. The beast's head, severed from its body but kept alive by the nightmare's cruel magic, speaks with Ludwig's original voice. He recognizes his sword, calling it his mentor and his guiding moonlight. He asks about his church hunters, wondering if they were the honorable Spartans he hoped they would become. This moment of lucidity makes Ludwig's fate even more tragic. He isn't simply a mindless beast to be put down, but a fallen hero who understands exactly what he has become. The dialogue choices presented to the hunter at this moment reflect the impossible cruelty of Ludwig's situation. Tell him the truth, that his church hunters became blood-drunk madmen just like him, and watch the last light of hope die in his eyes. Lie to him. Tell him his hunters remained noble, and grant him a moment of peace before the end. Either choice emphasizes that there is no redemption for Ludwig, no possibility of returning to what he once was. The second phase of Ludwig's boss fight, where he wields the holy Moonlight sword with a grace that seems impossible given his monstrous form, represents the closest thing to his former glory that remains possible. The cosmic blade's sweeping attacks, the waves of moonlight that tear through reality, the desperate nobility of his fighting style, all speak to the hero trapped within the monster. Even the music changes, shifting from bestial horror to tragic grandeur, acknowledging that this is not just a beast to be slaughtered, but a fallen champion making his last stand. The loot that Ludwig leaves behind tells its own story about his legacy. The holy Moonlight sword, available to hunters who prove themselves worthy, carries with it all the weight of Ludwig's story. Its description confirms that few ever saw the blade, suggesting that even at the height of his glory, Ludwig kept this cosmic artifact largely secret. The sword's ability to channel the cosmos, to throw waves of light that exist partially in other dimensions, makes it clear why Ludwig was so devastatingly effective, and why his connection to it may have accelerated his fall. But perhaps more significant is what Ludwig's story reveals about the healing church and the hunt itself. Every church hunter who followed in Ludwig's footsteps was walking the same path toward inevitable transformation. The rallying mechanic, the blood ministration, the increasingly powerful weapons, all of it was designed to create warriors who could fight beasts by becoming increasingly beast-like themselves. Ludwig wasn't an aberration or a failure. He was the logical endpoint of the church's methodology. The Spartan reference in Ludwig's dying words connects to a deeper theme about the nature of honor in a world where honor itself becomes corrupted. The historical Spartans were warriors who defined themselves through discipline, sacrifice, and dedication to their city-state. Ludwig wanted his hunters to embody these same virtues, to be warriors who found meaning in service rather than personal glory. But in Yharnam, where the very act of fighting requires consuming corrupted blood, such noble ideals become twisted into their opposite. The discipline becomes obsession, the sacrifice becomes self-destruction, and the dedication becomes fanaticism. Modern hunters who encounter Ludwig in the hunter's nightmare are essentially confronting the future that awaits all who follow the path of blood and violence. His transformation serves as a warning that even the noblest intentions, the greatest skills, and the most powerful artifacts cannot prevent the inevitable corruption that comes from trafficking with forces beyond human comprehension. The church knew this, had to have known this, given how many of their own clerics transformed. Yet, they continued pushing hunters down this path, because the alternative was allowing Yharnam to be consumed by the beast scourge without resistance. The tragedy deepens when we consider that Ludwig probably knew what was happening to him long before the final transformation. The intelligence that remains even in his beast form suggests that Ludwig was always aware, always fighting against the corruption, even as he continued the behaviors that fed it. This internal conflict between his duty to protect Yharnam and his knowledge that fulfilling that duty was destroying him adds a psychological dimension to his physical transformation. He wasn't just becoming a beast. He was choosing to become a beast, because the alternative, abandoning Yharnam to its fate, was unthinkable to someone of his character. The community of law scholars has long debated whether Ludwig's transformation was uniquely horrible or whether all church hunters who fully transform experience similar fates. The evidence suggests that Ludwig's case was special, that his connection to the holy Moonlight sword and his deeper exploration of the Chalice dungeons exposed him to influences that pushed his transformation in unusual directions. The equine characteristics, the partial fusion with another entity, the retention of enough consciousness to suffer, These elements seem specific to Ludwig, rather than typical of beast transformation. This uniqueness might explain why Ludwig was banished to the hunter's nightmare rather than simply executed. The Church, for all their pragmatism about eliminating transformed hunters, recognized that Ludwig represented something beyond a simple case of blood addiction. He had become a living symbol of both the hunt's greatest triumph and its ultimate failure. Keeping him alive, even in his monstrous state, served as a reminder of what awaited even the most dedicated servants of the Church. The symbolic significance of Ludwig's horse-like characteristics has generated extensive analysis within the lore community. Horses in mythology often represent nobility, power, and the bridge between the civilized and wild worlds. Ludwig's transformation into a creature that combines human, beast, and equine elements could represent his position as someone who tried to bridge the gap between humanity and the cosmos, between civilization and the primal hunt. The fact that he failed, becoming a chimeric monster that belongs to neither world, reinforces the game's theme that some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. Contemporary players experiencing Ludwig's boss fight for the first time often report it as one of the most emotionally affecting encounters in Bloodborne. The combination of the haunting music, the visceral horror of his appearance, and the tragic nobility of his final moments creates an experience that transcends typical video game boss battles. Ludwig isn't just an obstacle to overcome, but a character whose fall we mourn even as we participate in ending his suffering. This emotional complexity is what elevates Ludwig's story from simple tragedy to something approaching classical myth. The influence of Ludwig's story extends throughout the Souls series and beyond. The concept of a noble hero whose very strength becomes their downfall, who transforms into the antithesis of everything they stood for, resonates across multiple games and mediums. Ludwig established a template for tragic transformation that would be refined and revisited in subsequent From Software titles, each iteration exploring different aspects of how power corrupts and how the road to damnation is paved with good intentions. Within Bloodborne itself, Ludwig's shadow falls across every aspect of the Church Hunters organization. The weapons they use, the tactics they employ, the very philosophy that guides their hunt. All of it bears Ludwig's influence. Even hunters who have never heard Ludwig's name are following the path he carved out, using tools he designed or inspired, fighting according to principles he established. In this way, Ludwig achieved a form of immortality beyond his cursed existence in the nightmare. He became the hunt itself, its greatest champion and most terrible warning combined in one tragic figure. The item descriptions related to Ludwig paint a picture of someone who genuinely wanted to be a hero in the classical sense. He didn't seek personal power or glory for its own sake, but saw himself as a protector, a guardian standing between innocent citizens and cosmic horrors. The establishment of the Church Workshop wasn't about creating better weapons for their own sake, but about giving hunters the tools they needed to protect people more effectively. Even his recruitment of citizens into the hunt was framed as empowerment, giving ordinary people the ability to defend themselves and their loved ones. This genuine nobility makes Ludwig's fall more tragic than if he had been corrupted by simple ambition or greed. He fell because he cared too much, fought too hard, pushed himself too far in pursuit of protecting others. The very qualities that made him a hero, his courage, his determination, his willingness to embrace any power that might help him protect Yharnam, were the same qualities that led to his transformation into a monster. This paradox lies at the heart of Bloodborne's moral complexity, where virtue and vice become indistinguishable in the face of cosmic horror. The Latin lyrics that play during Ludwig's boss fight, confirmed by the music's producer to contain authentic Latin, add another layer to the encounter. The fact that these lyrics directly connect to the concept of guidance, which was Ludwig's primary relationship with the holy Moonlight sword, suggests that even the music is telling Ludwig's story. The sword guided him to greatness, guided him through the Chalice dungeons, and ultimately guided him to his doom. The music asks whether guidance itself can become a curse when it leads us down paths we shouldn't travel. Ludwig's question about his church hunters in his final moments reveals what truly mattered to him, even after centuries of madness and transformation. He doesn't ask about his own fate, doesn't seek absolution for his sins, doesn't even express regret for what he's become. He asks about his hunters, about whether they achieved the noble ideal he envisioned for them. This selflessness, persisting even in his monstrous state, confirms that somewhere within the beast, the hero Ludwig never truly died. He just became trapped, unable to express his nobility, except in these few final moments of clarity. The player's choice in how to answer Ludwig's question becomes a moral test that reflects the game's broader themes about truth, mercy, and the value of hope in a hopeless world. Telling Ludwig the truth, that his hunters became blood-drunk fiends, is honest but cruel, destroying his last illusion in his final moments. Lying to him, claiming they remained honorable, is dishonest but merciful, granting him peace he doesn't deserve but desperately needs. Neither choice is clearly right or wrong, reflecting Bloodborne's moral ambiguity where even mercy can be a form of cruelty, and even cruelty can be a form of mercy. The transformation of Ludwig from man to beast also reflects broader themes about evolution and devolution that run throughout Bloodborne. The game suggests that humanity's attempt to evolve to a higher state through consumption of the old blood instead causes a devolution to a more primal form. Ludwig, who pushed further than almost anyone in pursuing the power of the blood, devolved correspondingly further, becoming something that transcends typical beast transformation. His monstrous form might actually represent what humanity would become if it fully embraced the old blood, not ascending to become great ones, but descending to become something far worse. The fact that Ludwig's transformation maintained certain aspects of his personality and memories, unlike most beast transformations that completely erase the human mind, suggests that his connection to the holy Moonlight sword provided a form of protection, even as it contributed to his corruption. The sword anchored his consciousness, preventing him from finding the oblivion that might have been merciful. This preservation of self amid monstrous transformation represents perhaps the cruelest aspect of Ludwig's fate. He remained aware enough to suffer, but not enough to seek redemption. As we near the conclusion of Ludwig's tragic tale, it's worth considering what his story tells us about heroism itself. In most narratives, heroes who fall to corruption do so because they abandon their principles or reveal hidden flaws. Ludwig fell while remaining true to his principles, suggesting that in Bloodborne's universe, principles themselves can become forms of corruption. His dedication to protecting humanity led him to embrace inhuman power. His courage in facing cosmic threats exposed him to cosmic corruption. His nobility in trying to elevate the hunt transformed the hunt into something even more terrible than what came before. The legacy of Ludwig the Accursed extends far beyond his physical existence in the hunter's nightmare. Every church hunter who takes up arms, every citizen who joins the hunt believing they're becoming a hero, every weapon forged in the church workshop, all of it carries forward Ludwig's influence. He succeeded in transforming the hunt from a necessary evil into a noble calling, but in doing so, he also transformed noble calling into monstrous obsession. The very idea of hunting as something glorious rather than tragic might be Ludwig's most damaging contribution to Yharnam's fate. Yet, despite everything, despite the horror of what he became and the damage his legacy caused, Ludwig remains one of Bloodborne's most sympathetic characters. His fall wasn't caused by weakness or evil, but by an excess of the very qualities we typically admire in heroes. He cared too much, fought too hard, sacrificed too willingly. In a world where the only choices are between different forms of damnation, Ludwig chose the damnation that at least allowed him to protect others for as long as possible. That his protection ultimately became another form of harm doesn't diminish the nobility of his intention, even as it amplifies the tragedy of his fate. The holy Moonlight sword itself, as both Ludwig's greatest discovery and the instrument of his downfall, embodies the fundamental paradox of seeking power from inhuman sources. The sword granted Ludwig abilities beyond any normal hunter, allowed him to achieve victories that saved countless lives and provided guidance when mere human wisdom would have failed. But it also connected him to cosmic forces that human minds weren't meant to comprehend, exposed him to truths that accelerated his transformation, and ultimately became the anchor that prevented him from finding peace even in madness. As our exploration of Ludwig's heartbreaking transformation comes to a close, we're left with questions that Bloodborne deliberately refuses to answer clearly. Was Ludwig's fall inevitable from the moment he first touched the old blood? Or did his choices and actions accelerate a transformation that might have been avoided? Did the holy Moonlight sword guide him toward his fate, or simply reveal a fate that was always waiting? Was his transformation a punishment for hubris, or a natural consequence of the path every hunter must walk? These ambiguities aren't oversights, but deliberate design choices that force us to grapple with the same moral complexity that destroyed Ludwig. The story of Ludwig the Holy Blade becoming Ludwig the Accursed serves as Bloodborne's ultimate cautionary tale about the price of heroism in a world where heroism itself becomes corrupted. His transformation from Yharnam's greatest protector to one of its most terrible monsters illustrates the game's central theme that in seeking to fight monsters, we inevitably become them. But Ludwig's story adds a crucial twist to this familiar concept. He knew he was becoming a monster, accepted it as the price of protecting others, and continued forward anyway. This knowing sacrifice transforms his tale from simple tragedy to something approaching mythic significance. In the end, when we face Ludwig in that corpse-filled arena in the hunter's nightmare, we're not just fighting a boss or even confronting a fallen hero. We're witnessing the ultimate consequence of the path every hunter walks, the final destination of those who traffic with cosmic forces beyond human understanding. Ludwig stands as both warning and inspiration, showing us simultaneously the heights that dedication can achieve and the depths to which it can fall. His story reminds us that in Bloodborne's world, and perhaps in our own, the most dangerous monsters are often those who began as heroes. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into one of gaming's most tragic transformation stories. The tale of Ludwig's fall from grace into monstrosity represents everything that makes Bloodborne storytelling so compelling. The moral ambiguity, the cosmic horror, the very human tragedy at the heart of inhuman transformation. If this exploration has given you new appreciation for the layers of meaning woven throughout Ludwig's story, or if it's inspired you to look deeper into Bloodborne's incredibly rich lore, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support makes it possible to continue these comprehensive investigations into gaming's most complex narratives. Here at Keen 7 Lore, we believe that video game stories deserve the same deep analysis and appreciation as any other form of literature or mythology. Ludwig's tale proves that gaming can deliver narratives that are simultaneously entertaining and profound, that ask difficult questions without providing easy answers, and that linger in our thoughts long after we've put down the controller. Whether you're a long-time Bloodborne fan or someone discovering these stories for the first time, I hope this exploration has enriched your understanding of one of From Software's most memorable characters. Until next time, fellow lore seekers, remember that the greatest stories often lie hidden beneath the surface, waiting for those curious enough to dig deeper. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep seeking the truth, even when that truth might be more terrible than comfortable ignorance. This has been Keen 7 Lore, thanking you for your time, your support, and your shared passion for gaming's greatest mysteries.